What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me for Real Talk NFT. I'm your host, Brian. You know my amazing co-host, Joe, and we have a really special guest here for you today. It's Matthew Bartlett, who is the head of Web3 of VanEck. And if you don't know who VanEck is, well, they're an American investment firm that has over $90 billion in assets. So to say this, Matt's kind of a big deal. He's the head of Web3 at VanEck. Really happy to have him on. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. A big deal in my own mind, but yeah, GM to everyone. Thank you.
GM, well, you're a big deal to us, so that means a lot. You know, there's only 3 guys here, so number one in our hearts right now.
Yeah.
So to get things started, would love to know like a little bit about your role at VanEck and maybe even a little bit before that. How the heck did you get into this crazy world of Web3 and now you're running the head of Web3 at VanEck?
Yeah, fair enough. So I've been in TradFi for about 20 years, 8.5 at Franklin Templeton Investments, and then now well over 10 at VanEck. And it's mostly been on the sales management side. But in parallel to this, I was buying my first NFTs back in 2017, with my first mint being my participation in the Decentraland land auction. So I had these side hustle dreams of building a digital winery and selling NFTs that could tie back to real world wines. I was way early on that. And then, we soon ran into, which was my first crypto winner. So, not a great time to be in the space, but still I was there. And then sort of fast forward to 2021, obviously the NFT space picked back up. I was heavily concentrated in a project called Altered State Machine. They were democratizing ownership of AI. I was really into it. But long story short, it sort of like reignited my passion for the technology around NFTs. And funny enough, it aligned perfectly with VanEck, which as a firm wanted to launch an NFT collection. So I helped, I basically wore 2 hats at the time, sales management and sort of like the Web3 consultant inside the Web2 firm. And in May of 2022, we rolled out the VanEck Community NFT, which was 1,000 assets on Ethereum. It's basically a membership token. And we actually had 50,000 people sign up for this. But a big reason for that was it was free. It was also the first ever, NFT issued by a global asset manager. And, the one kind of weird thing about it was you weren't allowed to sell it. We had these terms that you couldn't list it or sell it. We didn't want to accidentally issue an unregistered security at the time, so we were super cautious with it. But we've had like 3 events around that. We did one the week of NFT NYC. We did this Web3 takeover event of the stock exchange and had about 80 different Web3 projects in attendance. It was a blast. But anyway, that's sort of my involvement so far.
You still collecting NFTs right now, even though we're in a little bit of a bear?
Yeah, I do. I'm really biased to one ecosystem, and I don't want to show my bag. But other than that, I'm more of a fan on sort of the RWA backed tokens, and we could talk about that later on. But the utility, the intrinsic value, I think that makes a lot of sense now, unless you're holding one of the the premier pieces of art, like the one you have behind you, right? Like the stuff that you really want to own that will probably, do pretty well long term, or like Pudgy, where they've got great IP. I mean, there's some great stories to continue to collect.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Like, about art NFTs make a lot of sense, even though they'll go through like ebbs and flows in the markets and up and downs. We do think that, the cream will rise to the top with certain artists. And you hit the nail on the head with like Pudgy Penguins and other IP brands where they're branching out way more than just an NFT or a JPEG or a community with meetups. They're doing major games out there. My kids are asking me if I can buy them Pudgy Penguin plushies in Walmart, and that's a true story.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of companies out there doing some great things, and that's VanEck included. And I know you're involved with SegMint. I would love to know a little bit more about SegMint and kind of what problems you saw in the market and how SegMint's going to address that.
Yeah, and maybe just let me touch on VanEck. You gave a light overview. I just want to hit on a couple extra notes. So we have been around since 55. Really early to gold, international, emerging market investing. But what a lot in this community like to think about is like the spot Bitcoin ETF, which us and many other competitors had launched in January. The thing that most folks don't know is that we actually were the first to file for a spot Bitcoin linked ETF back in 17. And in between now and then, we've built out a pretty robust team. We've got investment solutions, and now obviously we're trying to build out some of our own crypto native capabilities, which SegMint's a part of. But I guess I just want to make the point that VanEck really has this history of developing forward-looking, innovative solutions, but across both traditional and alternative investment classes, right? So I just want to make that point. In terms of how SegMint got started, so we launched that NFT project that I mentioned, and Jan VanEck promoted me to this new role of head of Web3. We didn't quite know what that looked like yet. So I said, what do you want me to do? He goes, well, spend 2 months, do what you think you should be doing, and then come back to me and I'll let you know. So for a couple months, I'm like writing educational Web3 content. I'm doing some deal flow. There were a lot of deals flying around at that time. We had some events. I come back to him. I'm all proud. I've done all this great work. I'm like, this is my body of work. Is this what you want me to do? And he goes, well, no, I think I want you to help us build out those crypto native capabilities. So he had a couple ideas in mind, but he ultimately said, if I came up with a good idea, he'd support it. We could build it, right? And so, I spent the next couple months doing a lot of research. Naturally, I wanted to do something with NFTs. I don't know if he realized at the time that, I was the degen that I was at the time, but it worked out. So I started looking at all of the problems that I sort of encountered as a user in the space. And I thought about issues that I ran into with my friends, like how could we share ownership of a high value asset? And then it's like, well, how could I do that with my friends in Discord? So now we're talking about trustless shared ownership. And so this whole line of thinking got me to look into fractionalization. And so did a deep dive of research into fractionalization. And I came back with the conclusion that all of the current platforms out there, and I won't name them, I'm not here to shame anybody, but they all suffer from at least one of these issues. Number one, they're custodial in nature, maybe. So here are your fractions, but we're going to take your asset. And that's a big deal because what if that's a Web3 game? Now you can't play the game. Or what if it gets you into a party? You can't go to the party anymore, right? Mm-hmm. The other problems are tied to the token standard being used, which is ERC20. So, think fungible tokens for those new to Web3. There's no visual associated with ERC20. So it's hard to flex to your friends that, oh, yeah, I own a piece of this art that I can't really brag to you or show you what it looks like. That's tough, right? Also, some protocols will issue 1 million tokens, 1 million fractions. Okay, well, how likely is it that in 6 months you're going to go back out and buy all 1 million fractions back? You're not. It's basically gone. And then the last big one is liquidity. Some want you to add additional liquidity in the form of Ether USDC so that the tokens have a trading pair. Well, you're trying to get liquidity out, not add more, right? And so as a user in the space, none of those are ideal. And that sort of formed the genesis of what SegMint is. And so what is SegMint? This is what I tell people, and this is sort of a new tagline, if you will. It's the only fractionalization platform where you retain ownership of the underlying NFT. So if you think about that for a moment, you're probably wondering how that works. We built a series of smart contracts that we call the lock and key model. And it works like this. Brian, you've got a Web3 wallet that owns a Fidenza. You bring it to SegMint. You lock the Fidenza in a vault. Well, the vault is owned by your Web3 wallet. So in this way, it's still self-custody. We've also integrated delegate.xyz. So by default, all of the token gated utility will be sent back to your original Web3 address. You could still play the game, go to the party. Once it's locked in the vault, you can create up to 100 SegMint keys. And the keys are ERC 1155 tokens. So these are semi-fungible clones of whatever you've locked in the vault. So if you've got a Pudgy in there and you want to make 5 Pudgy keys, that's what they're going to look like. That's what the keys visual is. But they're called keys because you need to own them all if you want to unlock the asset for transfer. So when you go ahead and vault your asset, you're going to mint these tokens right to your wallet. And then it's up to you sort of what you do with them. Well, SegMint has a trading platform where if you live outside the US, you can trade those keys like fractions. It's really kind of a new form of shared ownership. And you could own a Pudgy key or a Fidenza, whatever it is. But in summary, and this is why we say it's the only one that allows you to retain ownership, because if that was you who created the vault of the Fidenza, you still own the vault. You can still show people that you own it. But if we also bought a key, now we own a piece of it, right? So we get the low cost entry point, we get the visual, and we could even request delegated access to that asset. Maybe I want to go to the party. I'm in Florida, you're in New York, and you can't be at the party. Maybe I can. And so it's kind of a win-win for everyone. You don't need to add extra liquidity. That's what it is in a nutshell. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. I've always thought about that when you fractionalize items. You fractionalize items, you kill the utility. I mean, and we talk about that a lot with NFTs. We want to go to the party. We want to play the game. I want to earn the token. But if I have it in central custody, you're not. I've actually ran into this personally.
Yeah.
So that's what's so interesting. A reason I really wanted to have you on the podcast, because I think you kind of solved a problem here. And so, just so I understand correctly, you break this into 100 keys. I believe you said in ability to, or X amount of keys, an ability to retain or get the asset back into your full possession. You need to own all the keys.
You need to own them all.
100% of the keys.
Yeah, I'll tell you how that works.
Yeah.
So you could mint up to 100 keys, and that's limited by the smart contract.
Okay, yeah.
And again, we don't want you to have 1,000,000 keys. We want you to be thoughtful about it, right? So let's say you minted 5, and you list those keys for sale. Well, we have 2 market types that you could select from. One is free market. So let's say you priced each key at 1 ETH, and they sell. And 3 months later, you're like, I really want to get those other keys back, but the seller wants 5 ETH. That's free market. You either pay it or you don't. And until then, the asset's locked. Don't love that one, but I like it for people that might be in small groups who are friends and say, hey, Brian owns the high value asset and he's willing to let us get in on it, right? And so we could talk to each other. We're not going to hold each other hostage, right? But the one I would say is the recommended version is the buyout market. And so what that allows you to do is I'm going to list each key at 1 ETH, but I'm going to set a buyout price at 2 ETH. Now that's a price that only I can pay as the vault creator per key to buy out the collection. And then I could set a reserve price that's at or above that buyout, which anyone else can pay per key to buy out the collection. So what's nice about it is, we'll let the market dictate by collection what that ceiling should look like. If it's too low, they may not be interested. If it's too high, you lose control. So we're going to let the market figure that out. But it does give you that way of buying back the asset. And I think also it's very important to mention, you do have to complete KYC to be able to do this. And it is a closed system. So you can only trade with other SegMint users. So you might see it in OpenSea as a token, but if you went to trade it to your brother and he's not a SegMint user, the transaction will fail. So just worth mentioning.
That's awesome, Matt. I see a feature here called Create Safe. Is that the same feature as the vault you just mentioned, or is that something completely different?
The SegMint Safe?
Yes.
So we're actually pushing that back. What we had done, so that should probably disappear in the next couple of weeks. If you remember last summer when Ledger ran into their issue where they were sharding and encrypting the private keys, well, we had been building these vault contracts, and I said, why not just build a free multi-sig for people to use, and we'll just put it up on SegMint. We'll call them SegMint safes, and it could kind of be like a public good for the Web3 community. You wouldn't need KYC to use it, but we are pushing that back for now. We have a couple other things in the roadmap that we want to take care of beforehand.
So VanEck's seems to be really leaning into RWAs, and for everybody on the audience, or real world assets, or at least that narrative. Can you kind of give me a little bit of a breakdown what your thoughts are there, and possibly what the future may entail?
Yeah. So if we take a broader view of the markets, you could probably expect that VanEck's conducted a lot of R&D on the RWA opportunity from the perspective of an issuer. We actually find it pretty lacking in the short term, mainly due to low demand, fragmented liquidity. And what I mean by this is, on the traditional asset side, we would tend right now to lean towards like the traditional investment vehicle over the tokenized version when available, right? Like a good example of this is my dad buys ETFs and mutual funds. He's not coming to me and saying, hey, this VanEck ETF's awesome. I can't wait till it's tokenized. He doesn't care. He just wants the best exposure. And right now, it's the traditional investment. So could everything get on chain at some point? Yeah. Over what time period? It's probably a decade or more, right? And so where does that leave us in the short term? We think the better opportunity in our minds is to find the assets that are uniquely enabled by blockchain technology that, rather than merely just like changing the wrapper on a product to get institutional interest. And so when you start thinking about, exploring those different verticals, what comes up? It's tokens backed by high value collectibles that have intrinsic value, that are physically redeemable, that open new markets. And, over the last, I'd say 8 months, there's a lot of, I'd say, sustainable appeal for these types of tokens. Like one perfect example is Courtyard.io, which I'm sure you all know. At one point, they were selling packs, I don't know, Wednesday afternoons. They would sell out in like 30 seconds for $100 packs, and all they get you is one graded Pokemon card.
Right.
Then a couple months back, they did $1,000 packs out in 26 seconds. So what that tells us is that there is demand and liquidity for these asset-backed tokens. And literally proof to this, Monday, Tuesday, we put up some Courtyard Pokemon, back digital cards. They were sold out immediately. So, and maybe it's because of the fractional price. I don't know, but people seem to like them, whether they redeem for the physical item or not. So,
Yeah, I see a lot of um, similarities for RWAs and NFTs, not exclusively, not all RWAs NFTs. Can you explain that to like a normal layperson? Because it kind of a lot of people get it mixed up. RWAs, NFTs. Can you explain that correlation?
sure. So, okay, there's a couple ways I'd look at it. First of all, like RWA could be taking $1, putting it in an account managed by a custodian, having a digital twin or representation of that dollar put on chain, and maybe you're going to use that dollar for on chain treasury exposure, something like that. The other might be you have an investment grade bottle of wine and you choose to, maybe it's at a bonded warehouse or at the vineyard. You tokenize it by creating that digital twin, and maybe that digital twin's either in the form of ERC20 tokens, like a bundle of them, or one non-fungible NFT token, right? And that would be a good way to sort of bring them on chain. I have a preference based on SegMint. I prefer the NFT, and I like that idea, but both work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I was just saying, you made a good example. You said Courtyard was a great example for you guys, and having RWAs within your platform and seeing different types of products roll through. Was there anything else that poked out at you besides, digital collectibles?
So, with this platform, SegMint is a wholly owned entity of VanEck Europe. We're out of Germany, which of course Europe is part of VanEck. We found a path forward there, we think, to have this sort of trading platform, and we're trying to get licensing for this. So for the most part, you should look to SegMint for access to collectibles. Not, I'm not looking to bring treasuries or gold or other typical investment vehicles onto SegMint. What I am looking into, and who we're partnering with, are projects that have tokenized investment grade wines. We have one called MetaCask or Proofworks. They tokenize entire casks of high end spirits, and those could be priced anywhere from $15,000 to $1.5 million, and you could own a fraction of those. And what's kind of neat about that is at some point, unlike a Pokemon card, at some point those spirits will turn to vinegar. You have to bottle them. So if you hold your key past a certain date, they'll be redeemable for like 1 or 2 bottles of whatever the good stuff is, which is kind of unique. And so watch-backed NFTs, unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of yet, because we're so early still. There's not a lot of luxury goods like Birkin handbags and Louis Vuitton, right? Like that's not being tokenized. It will be, no doubt in my mind. We're just waiting for the next entrepreneurs to do that, right? And those are the types of things that we want to bring to SegMint. And when you think about the audience, which right now the audience is mainly Web3, I'd love for SegMint to be that intermediary between all the people tokenizing collectibles and just collectors in general, regardless of Web 2, Web 3. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes, but that's hopefully the goal.
So it looks like SegMint incorporates some sort of like gamification mechanics. And I'm looking at like Adventures Outpost and Isles of Cryptonia and Heroes Forge, cool stuff. It almost looks like I can claim myself a free NFT if I sign up. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned the KYC aspect, which not everyone in Web3 loves KYC. Again, VanEck's a regulated entity. I got to make sure we protect the mothership here. So you do have to KYC. To incentivize that, we let you claim a free adventure character NFT. And as you use the platform, as you create keys and list and trade, etc., you accrue XP or experience points. And over time, you could either redeem those XP for reward items, or you could level up your character. Think like World of Warcraft, or if you've ever played games like that. And ultimately, that level is going to dictate your SegMint token claim later on. Other game-related mechanisms, which I think you might find surprising, although SegMint is right now on Ethereum, Polygon, and we're right now deploying to Base, we partnered with a project called Portals.2, which is on the Solana blockchain. And we've built Isles of Cryptonia. So I chose Portals because I think that they have the best sort of like metaverse world builder that's browser based. So when you think about like access, who could access it? It could be somebody with $100 laptop in Indonesia, right? Like anywhere in the world. And they could access it and they could play the game. There's AI enabled NPCs, there's quests. They could farm XP, even if they didn't spend $1 on SegMint, and sort of like participate and have fun. And hopefully that leads them to the platform. But ultimately, I built it to sort of support the story and lore of the adventure character. But I'll say this, for not necessarily being like a Web3 game project, I'd say we have more of a game than most of them out there that advertise that. So I'd encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, you guys are killing it. It definitely shows off that you know what you're doing. Let me just put it that way. It has a very like just a real Web3 vibe to it. The degenwealth.eth in the background really fits well. You can just tell just going through your website and looking exactly how you're talking about how you're trying to incentivize people to engage in your platform. And how do you do that? How do you get people to KYC? You gamify some things and you make it fun and enjoyable. You build a community. So definitely like love what you're doing. I really do. And it's definitely genuine, I should say. You come off as very genuine and really well thought out. It's not just like you hear like VanEck, like this $1 billion corporation, you got more money than God, like you got all these assets. And you're like, do they really get it? Do they really get Web3? And just talking to you and going to the website, you get it. You hit it out of the park.
I thank you so much. I'd like to think that although there are probably several heads of Web3 in the industry, I might be one of the few actual degens in the role.
Yeah.
So
that's
great.
real. That's real Web3. If you haven't liquidated yourself on a random meme coin, I don't even want to talk to you. No.
Yeah. Being a DJ myself, that was my first thought when you mentioned the VanEck NFT and you couldn't sell it. And I immediately thought, how do I get my hand on one? Have you guys changed that rule? Is it still you can't sell it on the secondary market?
First of all, no problem. I can get you a VanEck NFT. They just can't be sold, right? And there was a point where we had somebody list theirs for 30 ETH, I had to wipe the metadata in the back, so it was just a white box on OpenSea. So they caused some problems, but no, we have some still. I'll get you one. And the main utility there is when we have that next event, you get sort of an invite to that if you want to go, right? And hopefully you would.
Absolutely. We love going to events, hosting panels, whatnot. And I ask this to a majority of the guests that come on, and you being very Web3 native and NFT DJ, and I would love to ask you this question. What's your idealistic, I guess for SegMint, but also yourself, what would you like to see in the world of Web3, NFT specifically, RWAs? What do you want to see lead the way for SegMint? And maybe outside of that, personally, utility-wise, what would you idealistic like to see? Because I know you said it, we're kind of 10 years out from like the normal layperson understanding safes and keys and whatnot. A lot of people want to do away with that, but I'm just curious of what you are kind of pushing forward in your product, and maybe what would you love for yourself.
So I think when people on X are pulling for the institutions to get involved, what you're really hoping that they do is sort of pay the legal bills and to get the stuff figured out ahead of you so that you could sort of build behind them. And we're doing that right now, right? And like getting the license I mentioned to be an authorized trading platform, not cheap. And there's something called a crypto asset license that I would have to get to be able to tokenize real estate in Germany. Well, the earliest I can get that is like a year and a half away. Like there's these roadblocks, and so we're sort of fighting that fight on your behalf, and hopefully opening up some opportunities for people related to SegMint. We talk about this lock and key model. I think it has a lot of other use cases, and one of the ones that I've shared in the past is, Brian, let's say you've got a vacation home, and there is a platform where you could tokenize that vacation home and then turn it into 52 keys representing a week in the year. And then people could buy those keys and trade them in a market. And maybe by owning the key, it gets them access, or they only have to pay the cleaning fee. And then they just show up and they put their phone against an RFID reader and they get in. And I'm thinking, that could be sort of like a disruptive technology between timeshares and Airbnb. And then take that model and replicate it across jets and yachts and car, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of potential. So personally, I'm very excited to see what I could do with that. But overall, I just related to RWA, there is a massive amount of value that is just tucked away in boxes within people's closets that I would love to bring on chain. I mean, you can't see it because I've got the camera up down too low. I collect video games, so I like graded video games. I would love a platform that would tokenize graded video games. And I know Finite and Courtyard and Collector Crypt, they all want to probably do that at some point. But let's go. I want to get involved in that. So those are some of the things I'd be interested in.
You got me a little bit with these graded video games. Not gonna lie, I have some tagged on eBay that like from old like Nintendo and Super Nintendo games that are graded that bring this nostalgic feeling back to me. I'm dying to know, what's your grail?
Well, I mean, my favorite game of all time is Zelda, like the original Zelda NES. But
we're talking like the gold plated one.
Is that gold cartridge? Yeah, the ones that I have up there, I've got like a 9.8 Breath of Wild, a 9.8 F-Zero. That was Super Nintendo. That was like one of the first racing games I played. Mm-hmm. Star Tropics, which was like a Zelda-like game. It came out after, and then I actually have it's like a promo disc that has like Ocarina, like a bunch of the original Zelda games all in one. It's kind of a unique disc, but no, like those are some of the ones that I'm fans of. But
it's so funny the things that we collect. But like when you said that, like I was like, well, I gotta ask because I don't know. There's something about that. No, it's definitely a nostalgia. Well, we're into NFTs and Web3, so we like to collect, obviously. But there's definitely a nostalgic point of view of like the game I used to rent. And now I could own it, never opened. I've seen them go for like, anybody that's curious. There's like, I think the Zelda graded 10 probably goes for like tens to hundreds of thousands. Probably something ridiculous.
I mean, like I go back to, I'll date myself a little, but like 007 GoldenEye. Oof. I mean, I was staying up all night at my friend's house. We were all playing that. And if you just look at the cartridge, it brings me back to that. So that's to your point of nostalgia. That's why I love that. I love that. I love the artwork. It's great.
The proximity mines in the complex. That was my level. I knew what way every door opened and everything. And people are like, how often do you play this game? I'm like, too much, guys. Too much, but let's go. Matt, no more questions on my end. Joe, I don't know if you have anything you want to throw over to Matt, but I do want to give him a chance. Joe, if you don't have any questions, to throw out like the information about the SegMint website, anybody to get a hold of you.
I've got a couple things. So I do write a weekly Substack. It's called blubbernotes.com. And it's NFT alpha for future whales. But really what's in there is like educational stuff. I've actually shared your podcast in there several times. Just it's all value add. We actually started our own podcast called RWA Segments, where we bring on the founders from these different tokenization platforms. Again, it's not a product push; it's just educational value add. And then, I encourage all of your listeners who live outside the U.S., especially, come on SegMint, claim your character. Take your favorite PFP, turn it into keys, trade it on the platform if you wish, but would love to have you to be a part of it.
I love it. Matt, it was a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We absolutely need to have you on again. You're doing some big things in the world of Web3. We appreciate it. We appreciate the call out, but just really appreciate you bringing a very genuine Web3 vibe to VanEck. I don't know who promotes people over there, but we need to get you a promotion. We'll tokenize it maybe. I'll buy it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks again.
Man.